Good afternoon, 8th grade. It's nice to see you again. I'm really looking forward to that Zoom class. We're going to do it probably early next week. I have a couple scheduled for tomorrow, and I will get to your class early next week, maybe Monday or Tuesday. Look for an announcement tomorrow. We are going today into we've done Southern Africa. We're going into Eastern Africa for something different here. The map is located on page 476 in your book, so make sure you are taking note of that and still working on your placement of countries in the for your map test. Okay, sorry about that, I'm getting confused. Okay, so here is one map of Africa. I'm going to show you a couple of them today. Yesterday we talked about, I don't have a cursor. Well, here it is. It is here. There we go. Okay. Yesterday we talked about these islands down in here. The islands off the coast of Madagascar, the Comodores, the Seychelles, all of those. We've talked about Southern Africa. Our next chapter, looking forward, it goes into Central and Western Africa. And then we do one on Northern Africa as well. But today we're going to start on Eastern Africa, and we're going to take about 3, maybe 4 days to get through it. One thing I want you to note on this map, even though my cursor has now disappeared again, is that you have the Sahara Desert in the north. Underneath the Sahara Desert is an area called the Sahel. This is grasslands. It's still very, very dry because it takes a lot of, it doesn't get a lot of moisture because of the desert to its north. And then underneath the Sahel is the Sub-Sahara. That is underneath the Sahara, okay, Sub-Sahara. And most of the area that we're going to be looking at in Eastern Africa is this Sub-Saharan Africa. You see some of it spreads up into the Sahara and the Sahel, but most of it is below it. Okay. So here we go. Africa's highest mountains and some of its most important mountain ranges are right here in Eastern Africa. This is a picture of one of them. But the most impressive feature of Eastern Africa is the Great Rift Valley. Now, when you look at this from a distance, which we're going to do on the next slide. Nope. Hold on, I'm getting to it. It's not there. All right, so I'm going to have to go back. I want you to look at this map. And I still don't have a cursor, which really stinks. So anyway, look at where the word Eastern Africa is, and you see how it has mountains right above it and mountains below it. That's kind of where the Great Rift Valley runs through, and it starts way up in Iran and Iraq and comes down through the Red Sea into East Africa. Right where the letter A is in Africa is about where it splits, and it goes actually in 2 different directions, but then it comes back together down at the bottom at Lake Malawi. It's really very interesting piece of geography there, because what it is it's these large mountains with a great big valley in the middle of it. And it's not just one little valley and you can see, oh wow, this is fascinating. It looks like, possibly during the flood, and I'm sure that's what happened. I'm sure it was during the flood. That what happened is these 2 parts of the continent just jammed together and shoved up the mountains in the middle and created these valleys in the middle. It's just really super cool. I hope God has a playback button that we can see what this looked like when we get to heaven. Okay. So that is the Great Rift Valley. Okay. The second, though, significant geographic feature of Eastern Africa is the Nile River. The Nile River, of course, is the world's longest river, and it flows west out of the Great Rift Valley into, of course, Egypt. Eventually, it goes into Sudan and then into Egypt. So it is a very significant part of the geography of Eastern Africa. It is, for years we couldn't find the source of it. We're going to talk about this in just a minute, but they couldn't find the source of it because Europeans hadn't ventured far enough into the continent of Africa. But now we know that it's actually 2 rivers that join to form the Nile. And those 2 rivers are the Blue Nile and the White Nile. The White Nile is considerably longer than the blue. So how did we find the source of the Nile? Well, in 1770, the Scottish explorer Robert Bruce traced the Blue Nile all the way into the mountains of Ethiopia. So he found the source of the Blue Nile. But Lake Victoria is the source of the White Nile, and a man named John Speke found it. He thought that Lake Victoria was the only source of the White Nile, but we found out later that the White Nile actually flows into and out of the White Nile. Here's the map I was looking for. Oh, there's my cursor. All right, so the Great Rift Valley comes down right through the middle of the Red Sea, down through here. It splits here and goes off this way and down this way. You see those big tall mountain peaks right through there. And then down here, right at Lake Malawi, it comes back together and goes out to the coast. So that's where the Great Rift Valley forms. Now, the Nile, the Blue Nile, goes off this way. Here's the Nile River right through here, going up into Egypt. Here's the Blue Nile going off on the east side. And the White Nile comes all the way down through here, all the way to Lake Victoria. Okay? The Nile actually begins, because it does come out of Lake Victoria, it begins here in Burundi, which we've already talked about that country. No, I think we're going to talk about it in the coming days. Okay, so there's Burundi. And so the White Nile source is actually Burundi. Okay, so here are the facts about these different countries we're going to be looking at. You can see there's a lot of them. Notice the lifespan is considerably shorter than what it would be here in America. 50 years in Somalia. Somalia is a country torn by civil war. Very, very difficult to live there. 56 in Ethiopia, which is actually one of the more advanced countries. Kenya is probably the most advanced. And you see that because of that, it does have the highest lifespan. Okay, so the Western Rift, the western side of that Great Rift Valley, runs along the western edge of East Africa. It contains 5 Great Lakes. Some of these are salt lakes through there, but some of them are freshwater lakes. And of course, freshwater lakes are wonderful because that is also a source of drinking water. The land between the two rifts drops to form a large basin where we get the Serengeti. The Serengeti Plain and Lake Victoria. The Serengeti Plain is one of the drawing cards of Africa, if you will. It's why people want to go visit, because they want to see the big animals that are at home on that Serengeti Plain. All right, the people of the east coast of Africa traded frequently with Arab merchants, and because they traded with Arab merchants, they developed a language that today we call Swahili. It was a mixture of Arabic and Bantu, which is the native African language that was in the area. The Portuguese came in later and tried to establish a trading post in Kenya, and the Kenyans were not very interested in it, and they eventually ran them out in, I believe, in the 1700s. Kenya received its independence in 1963 from Britain, and Nairobi, pictured here, is the capital. It is the most important city, and Kenya really is the key to even East Africa, to all of East Africa, because it is the most advanced country in the area as far as technology and things like that go. I'm going to try to attach a second video to this lesson when I put it on there, and it's about the capital of Nairobi. I think you'll find it interesting because it talks about those big 5 animals and how you can see them in Nairobi. All right, so West Kenya is dominated by high plateaus and mountains. It is very, very fertile land there because it gets enough rain. And it has good sources of water, good sources of soil, and agriculture just thrives in that area. Coffee is one of their main exports there. So that Serengeti Plain that we were talking about, you have to look twice at this picture. These people are jumping, okay? So they're not really that tall. They're jumping, okay? The Serengeti Plain, though, of course, has more large land animals than any other place on Earth. So it's a really fascinating place to visit. I think it would be eventually on my bucket list, but not super high, because traveling to Africa has not been on my priority list, I guess, so far. Maybe it needs to be. Maybe I need to move it up. Another area of Kenya that's really neat, this is actually part of the Serengeti Plain, is the Masai Mara Game Reserve. That's what Kenya calls its portion of what makes up the Serengeti Plain. And it is the home of the Maasai tribe, and this picture here comes from the Maasai tribe. They are a people known especially for their dances, their ritual dances, but they are a nomadic tribe, so they move around quite a bit. Okay, that's really as far as I wanted to get today. Let me see if there's anything else I needed to tell you. We will talk later about Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the highest point in Africa. Mount Kenya is the second highest point. These two mountains both of these mountains are on the Great Rift, in the Great Rift Valley. They are both covered with snow. And the snow cover there is decreasing, and it is a concern for us. It's one of those things we need to work at preserving that snow cover, because that is a source of drinking water and irrigation for the people of Africa. And without that snow cover, those countries could potentially face starvation and dehydration issues in the future. So look for the second video about the giraffes. Okay, you'll like it, I promise. It's really very interesting. And we will talk soon, okay? Have a good afternoon.